There he is. Welcome, Kevin. Nice to have you today.
Thank you. It's nice to be here. And I overheard just briefly, you were talking with whoever was here with us just for a second, but sounds like you're excited for this conversation. So am I.
Good. I'm glad you are. I'm super excited about it. Just the idea of manifesting your dreams. Just the thought of that to me is exciting. I think it's one of those things, so I've been in healthcare for 25 years and that gets lost. The idea of like really defining and kind of quantifying and thinking about, or just dreaming for that matter, of what could this world offer. So I can't wait to dive in here. So let me do this. Let me do my best to, I'll introduce you the best that I can. And then I want to hear from you. How'd you get here? How did you get to the point where you're now helping thousands of lives? How have you got to the point where maybe you've even manifested a life that's looking pretty good for you at this point? And then to the point where, because it's one thing to do for yourself, but then to figure out how to package that up and then help lives of thousands of other people. So I definitely want to dive into that. But let me give you an intro the best that I can. I'm sure I'll miss something or leave it out. But anyways, I know your thing is you empower people to discover the life's sole purpose.
Yes.
And that is even that, Kevin, I want to get into, because discovering soul purpose, that could almost be scary, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like what is my sole purpose? And we hear about purpose all the time. So I'd love if we can dive into that a little bit. And I know that you're certified as a life mastery consultant, or is that correct? Yeah.
Yep.
Through the Brave Thinking Institute. And I have had the opportunity to listen to several of your podcasts, and I know you give great kudos to your mentor, Mary Morrissey.
Yes.
And I love hearing that. I don't know Mary personally, yet I know how many great mentors I've had.
Mm-hmm.
And the impact that they've had on my life. I really wouldn't be the man that I wouldn't be here with you today if I didn't have people probably very much like Mary that just paved a way, believed in me, shared with me, loved on me, and gave me things. So I love that every podcast I heard you on, I heard you mention her name. So
I'm not surprised.
Yeah. Which is awesome. All right. So a sought after speaker, a trainer, a coach. You have workshops, coaching programs. Sounds like a little bit of everything. You are in the service world. And I want to say thank you in the beginning for just being here tonight.
You're welcome. And thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Of course. Yeah. So I would love to hear if you have a bit ability to kind of sum up, how'd you get here? Where did this all start from? Because also what I didn't mention there, you started off going to pharmacy school.
I did.
Which is, a different vibration. It's a different energy, very cerebral, very science-based.
Mm-hmm.
And to tap into energetically what you're doing now, I'm certainly could use some of that, but you also had to let go of some of it, correct? Yeah. So maybe 100%. You could share that journey with us.
Yeah, I'd love to. And it's a long story, but I'll summarize it as best as I can to pull out the nuggets of wisdom that I've learned over the years. But it started with honestly following my heart. Because as you so said, I was in pharmacy school. It was a 6-year-long program, which is an accelerated doctorate program too. The school I went to had 2 years of undergrad, then 4 years into the professional years. So when I started to wake up, as I call it, having a spiritual awakening, just be more aware that my thoughts have power and that I could create whatever I wanted to create, I started to actually question. It's like, well, why did I choose what I chose? Because I still love science, obviously, because I have a podcast with my brother. It's called the Science and Spirituality Podcast. Like we talk about science all the time, still love science. But I noticed that the reason I decided on being a pharmacist was in a way naive because I didn't know any better. At 17, when I was graduating high school, my dad asked like, all right, what are you doing for your life? Like, what are you going to do in college? Where are you going to go? And I was honest. I said, I have no idea. And thankfully I love my parents, and my dad helped in shaping the path. And he asked like, well, what are you interested in? So I said science and math and different things like that, chemistry, biology. And so he gave me a list of all these different ways I can go forward. Pharmacy was on that list, but it was also because the average income, someone who graduated with a doctorate right out of college, was 6 figures. So that really attracted me at 17 years old. But then years later, I was 4 years into my degree, almost getting my doctorate 2 years later, that I started to become more aware of just holistic health. And I had no idea about that, about the power of nutrition, the power of our mind and how we think, as well as also going for our dreams. And so I got introduced to the whole world of personal development, much more on the traditional side, not so much on the spiritual side yet. And so I was reading books like Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. I started to listen to people like Bob Proctor, God bless him, he's gone now, but much more traditional. But it started to wake something up in me. And that is when I started to just question my own path. And as I questioned it more, I realized that I wasn't happy in the path that I chose. Because as I got also more further into that degree, I started to realize that a lot of the work that was being done in the pharmaceutical industry was to treat symptoms, not underlying causes of diseases. And I honestly felt horrible about that, because I also was working at the time at a community pharmacy. I was seeing patients come in day after day, month after month, and they were just distraught. Like, they wouldn't say anything specifically, but I can tell in their faces that like they were coming back for next medication that really wasn't doing much to actually help them heal. It would help them to a degree. And I'm not bashing modern medication, Western medicine. It's got a place, but it's often too relied on. And so anyway, long story from that is that I decided to leave, which is a very difficult decision. My parents were not in agreement, especially my dad, because he had funded my education. Again, really blessed to say that, but I just knew it wasn't for me. And so I left. And so I got a 4-year degree, which I'm proud of, but I decided to not continue to get my doctorate. And I also didn't really know what I want to do next. I just knew I did not want pharmacy. And that's what started me in this whole industry of personal development, and then eventually years later becoming a coach. But that was like the pivotal moment of being honest with myself, of just knowing that it wasn't the kind of path that I wanted for my life.
I think that right there, to have that clarity of this isn't for me. Hopefully we all get to that spot. It was very similar.
Right.
For me. I knew the journey I was on. So I started off by going to chiropractic school, but I already had a degree. I had a business degree and a finance degree. And that I knew what I didn't want.
Right.
I was doing what I didn't want. I worked in finance, and I'll be honest, I wasn't spiritually evolved or anything like that. Yet I knew where I was sitting, and the things I was feeling every day was definitely not where I wanted to be in 20 years. It didn't glow for me. It didn't feel good. It didn't light me up. I would reach for anything. I just knew that moment of not wanting that, I was happy to be able to hear that happen. It's great. It's interesting something you said there, that when you were looking in the being, watching people take the medications, you were able to observe their outcomes. And I think sometimes when we look in the mirror, that's another one that it doesn't happen that much. So let's I would love to do this. Because I just love this topic. I love the idea of the art of manifesting your dreams, There's a couple of things that come to mind, and I'll take them one by one, but I want to get to all of them. One, is it possible that if we could manifest our dreams, you could also manifest your nightmares?
Yes. Oh man, that's a really great question and point. I think you already know intuitively the answer. I think most of us do. Is true. Absolutely. And there's actually a great quote that my mind works with a lot of different memories of different things I've studied. So you'll hear probably a lot of quotes from different amazing people in the world. But this quote by, I believe it was Theodore Roosevelt, who said that our thoughts manifest themselves into reality, but it's either if they're highly feared or highly revered, one or the other.
Wow.
And then they clothe the actual words he uses. It's even more beautiful. He says, as they're highly revered or highly feared, they begin to clothe themselves in the most immediate form available, which first and foremost is in our own energy. As those thoughts move into feelings, then we're going to live that out. And so absolutely, we can absolutely manifest our fears or our nightmares, the things that we don't want, which is what most people do, unfortunately, because we're not trained. The programming that most of us have been given is to focus on the condition, focus on what you don't have, focus on the thing that could happen, that could potentially be bad a week from now, a month from now, a year from now. And then we stay in the energy of fear, and then we manifest that.
It's interesting. You said that's pretty powerful, put in that sense that whatever is most revered in that moment, it's going to move in that direction. And the reason I say that, because being in healthcare, we have this kind of intuitive or almost a little bit of an innate fear of discomfort, of dis-ease. of disharmony within the body on any level. Could be emotional, anxiety, depression. It could be physical back pain. And it seems, at least in my experience, that very often our brains quickly go to the not so good place.
Right.
And in that, it's fascinating to watch this train wreck happening. Because I've seen it, for so many times. I'm sure you've seen it, over and over and over again. And as it's learned, it starts to pick up speed.
Yeah.
And in health, we are often, been able to observe that people literally manifest exactly what they don't want. I'll be interested in your input on this as well. Nowadays, now that we have the tools like Google, I feel like that manifestation has gone into turbo.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's overdrive. Do you kind of see the same thing?
Yeah, definitely. I think because of the access to information, there's just so much awareness, but not a lot of implementation. So yes, manifestation can go into kind of like a turbo drive, but sometimes it's like spinning the wheels, but not like with the rubber on the road as well.
Yeah. All right. So let's shift that, because I don't want people to think about their nightmares.
Right. Yeah, of course not.
Yeah. But I do like it because that's how quick it can be.
Yeah.
We can literally shift it like that. We could be like, oh, boogie woogie. Then all of a sudden, yes, this is fascinating. All right. So is manifesting your dreams similar to focusing on and manifesting your goals?
It is, but there is a slight difference, because at least my definition of a goal is something that you can achieve. It still will take work, and it may be months, heck, some goals, maybe even years down the line, but it's something for sure. It's like, yeah, I got that. I may know the certain steps. There might be some uncertainty, but I got this. A dream is something that is beyond the scope of your potential right now. It's something that you have to really stretch yourself to actually, first and foremost, even believe it's possible. Yeah. And so there is definitely a difference. Like goals are much, I think, more easy to achieve, or manifest. But then dreams is beyond, like it's going to cause you to grow way beyond than what a goal might help you to grow beyond.
That's a great definition of those two. Thank you. So let's go back to what you said there. There's when it comes to the manifesting that dream, sometimes it's hard to even believe it. It's interesting you say that. I found over the years that one of the hardest things when I'm, say, doing a coaching or something like that in one-on-one, when I ask the simple question, what do you want? It staggers people. It often becomes this very, very difficult thing to answer. A very fundamental question. What is it that you want?
Yep.
Why do you think that's so hard for so many people to answer?
Oh, programming. Number one.
Go deeper there.
Yeah. Sure. Our programming that we've gotten from, it's literally, it runs our entire life, is from the people who raised us, the environment that we were raised in, our siblings, our family members, our teachers, our classmates, and all of that kind of quote unquote programming. It's just messages that we've internalized and then have built a belief system around. That's it. It's quite simple to understand. And I think most people are aware of that, but to actually be aware of your programming when, like you said, like you've gotten that question asked to you, to be able to go beyond that programming, that takes work. It's not easy.
No, I agree. Not easy. I remember the first time it was presented to me in that fashion, and I had my goals and I love the way you position that, because the goals were a safe zone. They really were. They were lofty. And I also knew that if I hunkered down with the set of tools that I had, I'd be able to reach those goals. That's different than a dream. And I agree 100%. And I love that kind of when it comes to what do you want, if there were no strings attached, no barriers, that question becomes really hard. Yeah. And I think we have to get out of our own way. So what would you say to someone that they're listening to this right now? And I'm telling everyone, here's your challenge tonight's podcast. Answer this question. What do you want? How would you prepare them, if there's such a way, to start to open up their mind to think in a bigger way? And I know that's a long answer. I know that that's like 10 years, right?
Right.
That's coaching. But if you were just going to plant a seed, where would you go with that, Kevin?
Yeah, it's the particular words that we speak to ourselves. That's where I would go first. And I love the way you actually used a version of this question that I usually start with any of my clients with, is just if you didn't have any of barriers or limitations, by using those particular words, it helps us bypass the programming, because the programming is usually, well, I don't have the money, I don't have the time, I don't know how, I don't have something, there's some limitation, some lack. So when you set up a question like, if those weren't issues, then what would you love? It's a permission slip to go beyond the programming. And so my version of that kind of question is, if age, time, money, education, gender were not issues, then what would you love? What would you want? What could you do? What's your dream? And then the other second really important point with that is not only to use those particular words to ask yourself the question, but then to literally give yourself space. Because most likely the answer is not going to just jolt right out. Because again, programming keeps that suppressed. Because I really truly believe that we all have the answer within ourselves. And one of my favorite words in the English language is the word discover. Because if you hyphenate the word discover, it's two parts, discover. And so in essence, the process of discovery is just taking off the cover of what's already within. So I believe we all have dreams within us, but we just have to take the covers off, which in other words is the programming. And so to give it space, give it time, continually ask yourself the question and not feel like you need the answer right away. And then to also let go of those thoughts that are like, oh, I can't, or maybe if I was younger, maybe if I was older, maybe if I had more knowledge or not, whatever. Again, all those limitations will come up, but just to notice that and just work on letting those thoughts go and just allowing the answer to reveal itself.
When you say that, allowing the answer to reveal itself.
Yes.
So that sounds like starting to trust the inner voice.
Yes.
Does that take practice?
Oh yeah. Oh my gosh. I've been working on that for a decade and I'm still not quote unquote done. I don't think there's ever I've made it with that, but that's just a human experience.
Yeah. And I think, and I say that again, kind of knowing the answer to that,
yeah,
meaning that, like that right there, I think there's an absolute art to trusting the inner voice. I agree with you 100% that the answer is always there.
Yeah.
And sometimes we have to find the fortitude to listen.
Yes.
The willingness to listen.
Yes.
It's always true. It's always going to resonate. And when we go against that little voice, I think that's when we find dis-ease within the body. Again, hyphenated there, dis-ease.
Yep.
Doesn't feel good. For some people it might, if you aren't listening to the voice maybe for a decade, it may show up in real disharmony, in diseases, or maybe in the moment you needed to speak your truth and you didn't, and it just hurt. It felt like, anxiety or anger or something. So do you got any tips on how to trust the inner voice?
Yeah, it's a great question, because people make their lives work out of how to trust the inner voice. But I think for me, the one key practice, if I could just give, I don't know, like a specific tool for that, is meditation. For me, is one of the most powerful forms of being open to listening to that voice more and more. Because at least in my experience through meditation, is the discerning process. It makes it much easier, because so often with especially our more modern civilization in life, there's a million and one different things that take our attention away from ourselves and literally just what's going on within. And so, and thank God also there are many different tools like meditation apps or like free things on YouTube. Like I started meditating 10 years ago, like with just a YouTube video. It was like a 10-minute YouTube meditation on like a chakra meditation that I don't even know what the heck I was doing, but it felt good. But then over the years, as I've developed more of a stronger meditation practice without having those external tools, it's just created that much more space to be able to discern from, well, is that voice my fear? Is that voice the doubt? Is that voice someone else's voice that I've internalized? Or is that actually truly the inner voice that is guiding me? That is the truth that I'm looking for. And that voice has just become that much easier to get to know when I've given it the space. Again, it's coming back to like just giving it time. And so, yes, it is a training for sure. But personally for me, meditation is the number one thing.
That's beautiful. When you said the word space, it immediately made me think of the inner voice.
Yeah.
When we give our responses, our body, our minds, that space, I think that's when the inner voice has the opportunity. I always like to
Yes.
think that the inner voice it speaks quietly and consistently.
Mm, it does.
Yeah. And it never lies. It
Yep.
never lies. And therefore that's the consistency and the trueness to it. Wow, that's good. So, and I agree. There's an ongoing journey of the inner voice.
Hmm.
Sometimes we don't like what it says.
Right.
Yeah.
It's a relationship, actually.
It really is. It really is. So how
Hmm.
many, I can't tell you how many times a day or how many times a week when someone says, "Oh, I'm so tired all the time." I say, "Well, what do you think your body needs?" They'll
Mm,
say, I said,
yep.
this is not a trick question. What do you think your body
Yeah.
needs? Some sleep, maybe? Yes. Like,
Yeah. So
yeah.
simple.
Yeah. So oftentimes the inner voice is trying to speak, and it uses, at least in health, it uses our symptoms to talk
Yeah.
to us a little bit. And
Yeah.
often we don't like the message. Sometimes something might be in pain.
Hmm.
So let's talk about manifestation if we can, and shift it kind of
Sure.
in the health realm.
Let's do it.
I always believe it's always all of them: health, wealth, and relationships. I believe there's always this interconnectivity, and you can't really separate one from the
Can't.
other. Yet for a moment, let's talk about it in the health.
Sure.
In your world, have you seen people overcome diseases and disharmonies as a result of changing the way that they're thinking?
Yes. And I would love to take the opportunity to share my mentor story, because this is what really opened me up to like be serious about the study of this, because of the impact in a real life situation that this happened. So my mentor, as you mentioned, Mary Morrissey, she's in her 70s now, but she actually got into this whole realm of transformation back in the 60s. Because in the 60s, she was 17 and got pregnant and had her first child. And 6 months after she had her first child, she was in an intensive care unit at a hospital in Oregon, being diagnosed with fatal kidney disease.
Mm.
And the doctors had no idea why. There was no explanation. Again, this was also back in the 60s. There was not a lot of development in that as well. And so that was actually a death sentence.
Mm.
So many of the doctors that looked at her were like, yeah, I'm sorry, there's nothing we can do. You have about 6 months to live. And her story changed when there was a chaplain that came into her unit at the hospital and was giving people prayers and asked her. And she grew up in a kind of a religious family, but like didn't really fully believe or didn't care for it. Cause I mean, she was 17. So she said yes, like, yeah, I'd sure, like whatever, like you can pray with me. And that what that lady did was nothing about prayer. It was actually more of just asking Mary, was like, what's going on in your life? Because
Mm.
she had a belief, this chaplain had a belief that whatever was happening in the body started in the mind.
Wow.
And so after sharing her story, Mary had a lot of self-loathing because she got pregnant at 16, then had her kid at 17. And back in the 60s, that was very taboo. She actually got kicked out of her high school and had to lose her friends and had all these terrible things happening. And so she, after a year and a half, 2 years, was so just negative or just harder against herself that that chaplain said that maybe that's a cause for what you actually had just experienced. And so she opened a corner of her mind. Mary opened a corner of her mind to the possibility that was true. And the chaplain helped her have a vision for what would life be like if you could heal. Because the vision right now that the doctors were giving was you have 6 months to live and that's it. So she started imagining, dreaming, well, what would I do if I could live? And there's two main things is I would raise my little boy and then I would become a teacher because she wanted to become a teacher. That was a dream of hers at that age.
Mm.
And so story goes on. I mean, now she's in her 70s, so she absolutely did heal. And it was mainly because she started to focus her mind on the vision of what she would love and not give any more attention to the pain in her body or that the self-loathing thoughts anymore. So they did, like, I mean, modern medicine, Western medicine, they did do some surgery. They took out the diseased kidney, but there was still part of a kidney left. But the change over the next 6 months, the doctors kept monitoring her. After 6 months, there's 3 doctors that were looking at her and saying, we don't know what just happened, but you have a perfect bill of health. You have one kidney that's actually working for both your kidneys. Like, you're good to go. You're living, like whatever you're doing, just keep doing it.
Mm.
So that to me is like one of the most powerful stories I've ever heard about how our mind, our mindset, or that we can manifest actually good health by means of what we focus on.
Wow. I literally love hearing stories like that. It motivates me to continue to do the work that I do as well. I've
Right.
been fortunate to literally see things like that and hear about things like that probably
Beautiful.
hundreds, if not thousands of times. It's
It's
just
amazing.
the world we live in. And it's
Right.
so, and it's, I love hearing it because it's so profound, especially back then. Now,
Yeah.
again, like you said, there's information at our fingertips.
Yep.
And you can real quickly say, how do I self-heal, and Google it, and poof,
Right.
like
Yep.
follow these people. They've already done it for you. Back then, that's a unique individual who's thinking so far out of the box. And I think one of the things that you say there is there's two parts I think are really profound there. The one that do you say the pastor came in, or
She was called a chaplain, but it was kind of
okay,
like
the
a pastor,
chaplain
but it was a woman that, yeah, gave
comes in
prayer.
and asks her what she's thinking about? Huge.
Yes.
Huge, huge, huge. I want to come back to that in just a moment. But I think even more powerful than that is what happens when we focus on love.
Yeah.
And it becomes so clear when an individual, when groups of individuals, when communities, when larger numbers of people are acting out and operating and thinking about love, and that becomes the driving energetic force, it's unstoppable. Like, I don't think,
Absolutely.
yeah. And it's really interesting. And then we're going to sidestep here for a second. The
Sure.
last couple of years were really interesting. Right. That was really
Yep.
interesting. And one of the things that I've often said, I think right now we're just lacking a little bit of love.
Mm.
We're letting fear push its way in where love needs to fill that void.
Yes.
And and I truly believe sometimes we have to get beat up a little bit in order to really come out on top.
Sure.
Right. Like I think
Yeah.
sometimes that has to happen. And slowly but surely, I do see the foundation of love getting stronger. And maybe this is my pipeline dream or something, but
Hey, it's a dream though.
yeah, I love it. Yeah. And I also have this dream that, the next couple of years, we're going to giggle a little bit out of all the stuff that made us argue and get mad at each other and not love one another that we didn't even know. And you wore this hat and I wore this hat and we didn't like each other for it. And it's just because we lost our ways. We
Sure.
stopped focusing on love. So I love the fact that you just said that, because I think when we focus on love, whether it be for your health, your wealth, relationship, only good things manifest after that.
Yes.
I remember the first time I learned that there's only two emotions in life. There's love and fear. It really resonated with me.
Mm.
And I think about that all the time, thinking about, Bart, which one are you coming from right here, right now?
Right.
Whether I'm nervous or whether I'm, angry or whatever, maybe which emotion is driving, or which, is it love or is it fear that's driving this next action? So I love how you put that. So let's go to the part about the thinking, that it all starts in the mind.
Yes.
Because I think, again, this is fascinating. And this is where the programming can be so significant. And so let's talk about for a moment about who you have around you.
Yes.
And let's, without pointing blame, right? Because we never want to do that.
Right.
But how would someone recognize and how to put people around them that serve them in their ways and achieving their dreams? And how important is that?
Oh, it's essential, I find. Really, like it's actually a core component of any time that I work with a client. It's like, all right, who are you surrounding yourself with? And my mentor calls them partners in believing, is to really have people around you that help you believe in yourself and your dreams more than you even could on your own. And that's super powerful. And personally, for me, it comes from just actually having the conversation, because sometimes we often fall into just relationships because of it's the environment, like you go to school with certain people or you work with certain people if you have a certain job, or just family as well, like your nuclear units. Like, it's like, yeah, you were born in that family. It's like, you kind of can't get out of that maybe until you're an adult, but there's certain things we can and can't change. But most often we can choose the relationships that we have. And it comes with a simple conversation. I do this very often in my life. If there's someone new in my life, and not that I say like out directly, like, hey, are you going to support me in my dream? Not at all. But it's more of just like a feeling out. It's like, well, what's your dream? Like, what would you love? And if someone's open to that and just that conversation, then I get a pretty good indication of where they're at. Is like, if they're going to be someone who's going to help me in my path to what I want to create or not. And then you just audit that. It's like, well, do I want to spend more time with this person or not? It sounds simple, but I mean, it's the farthest thing from simple, obviously, because human relationships are complex, but it starts with that, I think.
Yeah. And quite frankly, I think it's simple. It gets simpler the more you practice it.
Yes, for
Right.
sure.
And then with that, I think the more you give yourself permission to not judge, but say, okay, next.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
And not,
exactly.
and not beat yourself up about it, not think you're a bad person if you say, well, maybe this person just isn't for me.
Right. And also to not judge too. That's something I've been learning over the last handful of years too. Is like, if this person is not my flavor or my cup of tea, as the saying goes, then I don't need to feel like I have to spend time with them or feel like I'm like saying that they're bad at all. It's just they're on a different path, different journey, and they have different focuses, and it just doesn't align. That's okay.
All right. So someone who's just starting their journey, they have this gut sense, very similar that you had when you
Yep.
were probably entering or getting near the end of pharmacy school.
Yeah.
Very similar to me when I graduated college. I had no idea I wanted to become a chiropractor, but I knew there was something else for me. How important is a mentor, a coach in those moments? Do they help, of course, just to pat you on the back, or can they create trajectory for you?
Oh, it's 100% trajectory. And I actually really appreciate the way you just asked that question, because I actually never even realized that an assumption a lot of people have,
Mhm.
is that like that it's like the pat on the back. It's like, oh yeah, it's just a cheerleader, someone just saying like, yeah, you could do it. Like, not at all. Like, there is absolutely something to be said about someone who's walked a certain path,
Yeah.
who has learned things that you can learn from their experience that would change you. Like, I actually, and change you in a good way, not a bad way that like you wouldn't want to be changed. It's like you still accept what someone shares as advice specifically for you. But and funny you mentioned that you're a chiropractor. You've been in chiropractic school. I'm assuming that you are a chiropractor then, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. So like that's physical adjustments, right? I find a lot of mentors and coaches, it's the mental and emotional and spiritual adjustments they give,
Yeah.
and it forms a different trajectory. And a great example that has helped me just have a visual of what happens with mentors is like, let's say for one, like even just one session with someone or one program, it's like you may feel like there's a 1 degree shift that you've had, but if you take that down years down the line, you're in a completely different place. And the analogy with that is, if you take a plane, let's say flying it from Los Angeles to New York, that's the destination. If you shift the plane 1 degree north and you stay on that track, you're hundreds of miles north. You didn't hit your destination. So it's a very different experience when you have just those 1 degree shifts over time.
Agreed, 100%, and literally just 1 degree. And I think that the trajectory, that's where our mentors and our coaches can play such a significant role, because they've had the experience in going down that path. And it's very interesting. I love how you put that, where there's a spiritual adjustment, right? And there is, and that the programming that I think has been taking place over the last 2 years is to kind of disallow and disobey that inner voice and that speaking, because there's been so much anger and really fear, and the anger is like kind of a derivative of that.
Yep.
And I think maybe now more than ever, that individuals who are doing the work that you're doing, it might be more important now than ever. And for those who thought it might never been for them.
Right.
Yeah. I know that though the biggest changes I've had in my life is not because I acquired another skill set, quite frankly. Those were easy.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like to learn how to be a chiropractor, I do functional medicine and all of those things. I feel that those are just learned.
Yeah.
And I also feel like anyone can kind of learn them. But the ability to increase my capacity emotionally, spiritually, were the hardest, but also the most profound.
Yeah. Beautifully said. Because it's actually the most challenging thing to do. Yeah. In fact,
very
challenging. Programming. Yeah.
Especially if you're an old grown man like me, because you don't want to change your ways.
Sure. Yeah. I actually, funny you say that, because I'm about to be 30. So okay. I can't play this card of like being young anymore. But years ago, when I first started working with my mentor, okay, I was, yeah, go ahead.
At 30, you are young.
Yeah, I know 100%. But I think it's the card that I used to play, because I was 21 when I got into studying with my mentor. Yeah. And I would go to these events. She would have events multiple times a year. And most people that were at those events were in their late 30s at the youngest. And so I would get this message all the time is, oh my God, you're so amazing. Can't believe you're here so young. Your life is going to be a completely different trajectory now. I would always say the exact same thing is, thank you. I really appreciate you saying that. And I'm even more impressed by you.
Yeah.
Because literally what you just said,
Mhm.
it's like years go by as you have more programming. And so it's that much more difficult sometimes to change. And so it's, I say it as just, I see it as more of like I see it more in awe of people who are down the line and still willing to change,
Yeah.
because that takes courage.
Yeah. It's a really a beautiful way to look at it, because you're right. There's so much training and programming in years of decades of thinking and doing a certain way. And there's not very many people are willing to say, oh, maybe I was doing it in a way that wasn't great
Right.
or really sucked or whatever. Right.
Yep.
Yeah. So, all right. So in that vein, let's talk about how important is failure.
I'll quote another quote here. One of my favorite books is called U Squared by Dr. Price Pritchett. And he's a trainer of organizations, like large organizations, and does a lot of what's the word for it? Mergers. And so works at a high level and but very simple principles. He has an entire chapter in the book U Squared on failure. And he says, if you want to increase your level of success, double your rate of failure.
Yeah.
Counterintuitive, but I know you know the principle there. But as you fail more, you learn more. As you learn more, you succeed more.
Yeah.
It's a simple formula. It's just that we're not willing to fail.
Yeah.
It comes back to the courage.
There are so many analogies, so many truths behind it. So when I get time, I practice Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and which is a martial art. And one thing for certain, if you could learn it on paper, and I could watch videos all day long, but the only way to truly learn it is to go on the mats, train with someone else, and literally get choked out.
Yep.
And in that moment, you've learned more in 1 minute of training, because you're doing it and you're failing, you're doing it improperly, than you could have in years worth of book learning. So
yes,
that experience of that failure gives you like, whoa, and the light bulbs go off.
Yep.
Maybe not in the moment. In the moment, I'm thinking, I can't breathe. This is not fun. This is awful. So in it's one of the reasons I love martial arts. I do think it's very artful, because you get to interpret, learn, reevaluate, go for more. I think those things. And I always love bringing up that question about failures, because I think so often we're afraid of it.
Yeah.
And that sometimes, I believe, is what inhibits us from listening to that inner voice.
Absolutely.
Would you agree with that?
Yes, absolutely. Because the fear of failure just takes us away from the opportunity to have experiences to learn, like you said. And when we're so stuck there, we stay in that emotion of fear, and then love is not present.
Right. And I think sometimes maybe the word we should be using instead of failures, you have to have more experiences.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because that's 100%. All they are. That's all they really are.
Exactly.
Yeah.
There's a great distinction that I learned from Bob Proctor, one of my earlier mentors. He said that you can have failure without being a failure.
Interesting.
Different wordage, but it's the exact same thing. It's like, in essence, you're going for experiences, but you're not the failure. You didn't fail.
I absolutely love that. And I think if our listeners kind of embrace that, my message right after the beat, just go for more. Life is short. My goodness. Like, we don't know. We literally don't know. And when our card is pulled, if you want to call it, life is very, very short. And to live less than going for it. Because one of the reasons I love this topic, and I think there's a quote you have somewhere. I'll throw it out there in just a moment. But just the idea of trying to, or thinking about manifesting your dreams gets me excited. Like I'm like, literally, I'm like, this is just fun. I like thinking about it. So it's either in one of your podcasts that I listen to, you talk about the power of imagination. And how powerful that is. And I think about that statement all the time. My hypnosis coach, the gentleman who taught me hypnosis, used to always say, is more powerful than imagination is more powerful than knowledge. And I think you have a conversation. I think that's something deep for you. Can you elaborate on that a bit?
Yeah, I would love to. I'm going to look it up really quick, because that was an Einstein quote.
Okay.
Is more important. So imagination is more important than knowledge. For knowledge is limited, but imagination circles the world. And so just imagination is the key, the cornerstone really of shifting and changing your life in some degree, because that follows all the way back to our question about opening up to your dream and going beyond the programming. It's like, that's using your imagination to really just consider. And the funny thing I find is that it's just been trained out of us to a degree, because when we were kids, imagination was wild and free, like no problem, easy. And just, I'll give an example of this. One of my soon to be niece, I'm getting married in 2 months. And my fiance has 3 nieces, all under the age of 8. They're amazing. Her youngest niece, her name is Luna. And I was at one of their soccer games, and she was just playing on the side of the field because she's like 3 years old. And she was just literally playing with grass, picking up grass, putting it in a cup and saying, "Your order's ready." And I look over and she just has this empty cup with just grass in it. And it's like, "What'd you make me?" And she was like, "It's an espresso." And I was like, "Okay." And she was like, "Drink it." And I was like, I just pretended I drank it, gave her it back to her. She dumped out the grass. And she's like, "All right, what do you want next?" She did that for a half an hour straight of just, "What's your order? What would you love?" And just going on, just playing. Like, imagination, so powerful. But yet we just forget it, thinking that it's like a kid's thing. But it's literally the only thing that actually can help us move beyond our current circumstance. The only thing.
And I could say, looking back, so I'm 52 years old,
Mhm.
and I started my first practice probably just before I turned 30. And my imagination was so big, so broad, that it is what created my new reality. So, for example, if I was waiting for the skill set and the knowledge of how to open a practice, I would have never done it.
Right.
I would have never done it. But my imagination was so wild, and I had this, and I still have this incredible wife. They'll be like, "Yes, you can. You can do that. Go
Yes.
get it." Like, she would just be like, "Yes, we can do this." And my imagination overrode all of the obstacles that seemed to seep in little bit by little bit as my career went on.
Mm.
So, and I was always privy to this. I wasn't privy in the beginning. I was just imagination running wild as a little kid. I was going to a candy store. I couldn't wait to open my practice and start serving people. In the midst of it, about 10 years in a row, I went, wow, I opened up my office above a bunch of other chiropractors who were experienced, well recognized in the town, but I opened up because there was a cheap room for rent above them. Opened up on the second floor, no elevator, one-way street, limited parking. All of these things that if I did it now, I would overanalyze these things. I'd be like, "Nah, I can't do that." But the imagination was running so wild that it just literally just didn't care.
Yeah.
As I watch people walk through life, and I'm very fortunate to have incredible creators around me. I have this incredible wife, I have this team, and we have this yoga community, and we have this organic cafe, and people are always in this light of like moving forward and creating. So I'm very blessed to have those in my life. And I'm thankful because oftentimes I think, and I'm kind of speaking to everyone who might be, deeper into their career and have a lot of responsibilities. And sometimes we forget literally how to imagine.
Right.
And I'm going to throw myself into that category. I'm very motivated. I think I'm still creative. I'm very good at goal setting. And I still struggle to imagine what is possible for out there for me. So I love how you're saying that. And there might be a value in being able to observe someone who still has kind of the imagination blinders.
Sure.
And
Oh,
maybe,
yeah.
and maybe and like someone like yourself who you haven't put 30 or 40 years of blinders on
Sure.
prior to using imagination as your foundation.
Right.
All right, so let's continue to kind of roll forward here. And again, because I love this idea of manifesting my dreams and your dreams and everyone else's dreams. So if you're thinking about this, does it start like it would setting a goal? Like
In a
you
way.
write it down?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. I don't work with anyone unless they're willing to write down their dreams, because there is a power of, and it's actually what happens in the brain when you write something down, especially when it comes to dreams, because like we said before, or that definition I gave, is that dreams are beyond the scope of your understanding of knowing how to create it up until now. So by writing it down, you actually create literally more brain coherence. Because when we dream, it activates the right hemisphere of the brain. It's our imaginative side of our brain. But then the left hemisphere is activated when you write it down. So it creates a little more brain coherence. There's more connection between the two hemispheres and the corpus callosum. You literally have more power to achieve that, even if you have no idea how yet, by writing it down. but in a particular way. So I would recommend starting, because like you said, it's like by goal setting, like you said, like you're a great goal setter. Obviously, writing down goals is a part of your practice. So that is a part of it, but in a particular way. I recommend, if we're going for a dream, to not set the dream for any shorter than 3 years from now.
Nice.
Because our subconscious mind has it's a recording station of literally every single thing that has happened in our entire life. You mentioned hypnosis before, so you're probably aware that literally you can, under the right hypnosis, can remember from when you were, 2 months old. So our entire subconscious mind has a recording of everything. However, our conscious awareness can only really recall about a year of really good memory. Beyond that, it's a little bit fuzzy. It may take some concentration or focus, or again, hypnosis, some practice to be able to remember further back than a year in really good detail. So when you go 3 years out, it goes beyond the bounds of what the subconscious thinks is possible based on what you've done a year ago. Because 3 years ago, 3 years can change a lot. And so if you actually even think back 3 years, like, well, I guess it depends on the person, because if someone's just actually staying the same, like 3 years ago might be the same, but still, it's the principle still works, because the subconscious mind and how your conscious mind remembers from the subconscious. So 3 years out is the starting point I recommend, because then your mind really doesn't know is like what is really possible. It gives you more kind of flexibility to get into what you would really love, not based on condition.
All right. So you start with this written down manifestation of your dreams at least 3 years out. So you got to go big.
Yes.
And I'm guessing this doesn't just, you don't just sit down and boom, boom, you're done. This might take a couple of days, maybe, I don't know, a week. You really have to sit on this.
Yeah, it's usually a couple weeks, I'll say, especially in the beginning phase. Like nowadays, like, because I've been writing down my dreams since 2014, so I've become very prolific or proficient with the skill. So it'll take me an hour, but for someone who's beginning, like, give yourself. It's like going back to like listening to the still small voice, is giving it space. And so again, also when we ask the question, what would I love if time, age, money, education, whatever limiter was not the factor? What would I really love? The answer might not come up right away. But another principle to work with when it comes to dream, I call it dream building. It's what my mentor has coined it as. It's like building your dreams. So the dream building process is the principle is you start with what you know for sure. Because we all know for sure, for example, like we want great health. And you could describe that maybe in specifics, like if you're overweight, you'd love to have released the weight. So that's a more specific thing for you. Or if you have some illness or disease that you're facing right now, it's like, then you've healed that. But we all want good health. And then generally, it's also the same with relationships. Like you want great relationships with your partner, or maybe you want to call in that partner, or great friends. You want to develop those kinds of friends, partners in believing. So there's things that you can start with what you know for sure, and then build on that from there. Because some of the things might be a little bit more fuzzy, like going to one of the things you mentioned in the beginning of like just what I work with my clients with is their purpose, what their soul is here for. Like that's a big idea. And so it might not be revealed like right away, but it just comes with time.
So if someone doesn't know their purpose sitting here right now, it's okay.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
There's literally a process of understanding that. And I say that because often I will hear that. What's fascinating in the health world is that we have a bunch of labels and names for what's going wrong with the body.
Sure.
But ultimately, there's a disharmony. So another way of saying, and I think you'll align with this statement or this quote, is that there's really no such thing as disease, but it's rather there's a lack of health.
Yes.
And when there's a lack of health, there's a disharmony or disease that shows up in the body. So all of it, and this is hard for people to grasp at times, but everything from a sore low back to literally a kidney slowing down, there's a lack of health taking place. And if we focused on that generation of health, and that's where maybe you could use your experts, your doctors and your coaches and whatnot to help manifest better health with that particular thing, that's when we really get to fill the room or fill yourself back with health. Or the analogy is often, there's really no such thing as darkness, right?
Yes.
It's rather just a lack of light.
Literally.
And I think I heard you say that maybe on a podcast. Go there for a moment, because I think I love that analogy that it's never dark, it's just lacking light, because
Yes.
we always know the answer then.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I'm so glad you brought that up. And you related it perfectly with health and what you do, obviously, which it sounds like you already had that kind of belief. But I love to go a little more scientific on the side, because it can kind of seem like a very heady concept.
Yeah.
It's like there's no disease, there's just a lack of health. It's like, what do you mean? I feel the pain in my body, but there's a deeper level of seeing this. So when you gave it the analogy of like darkness and light, there's a more material way of looking at this, a more scientific way of looking at this. There's literally no such thing as cold. There's no reality of what it means to have coldness in the air or like feel cold. There's no reality that that's an illusion. It's just a lack of heat. And that could be measured literally. What we know is like, all right, like a thermometer measuring the temperature in a room. It's just the mercury, like actually connecting with the outside temperature and noticing the particles of what we call heat, or usually, like I say, I'm not sure 100% if it's like the photons, but photons are light. Goes back to that analogy of like light and darkness, but there's substance to heat. You can measure that, but you can't technically measure cold. It's just a measurement of a lack of heat, because there's no more particles that actually show up as the heat there. So that's the one analogy that I always love, that you can then relate directly to. There's no disease. It's just a lack of health.
Yeah.
Because that gets more energetic, but it's true.
Yeah, no, I'm with you 100% there. And I think once you start to think about those things, and in the moment, that's not the conversation I bring up with people when I'm like, hey, listen, there's no such thing as disease as you're dying. Right.
Yeah.
Not in the moment. And I
Right.
wouldn't tell anyone to then be like, where's my light in the moment? Sometimes we have to feel fully.
Yes.
In order to embrace what it is that we're feeling, and then, kind of climb ourselves back out of that hole here.
Yes.
All right. So we talked a little about the failure. So let's shift that a little bit and talk about responsibility. Yeah.
Great word.
Yeah. And again, health, wealth, and relationships, right? Right across the board. The responsibility, I think the success we do or having, or the losses we have in any one of those, is a large part of it goes back to the responsibility that we personally take.
Yes.
Would you elaborate a little bit there as well?
Love to. Yeah. This is another word that I like to hyphenate to get a deeper sense of what it means to me. When you hyphenate the word responsibility, it's response ability. It's literally your ability to respond. But most of us don't take responsibility. We're reactive. Circumstance happens, like we get a diagnosis in our health and we're like, like that sucks. This is not good. It's because of that person or that situation, or because of my upbringing. We blame, or most people do blame. And then there's a lack of responsibility there. And so we're not responding, we're reacting. It comes from programming. When we take responsibility, and it sounds like the way in which you defined it, which there's definitely like an overlapping of the way that you're defining, the way you're using it, and then the way that I define it and I'm using it, but it's almost exactly the same. It's just a way of looking at it. But I see it as the ability to respond, because we all have that choice. It's just that so often we're unconscious to that choice. And then so we run programming. I actually say, this is another fascinating thing I learned from Bob Proctor, which I teach a lot in my coaching and my clients and my podcasts, is that we always have a choice, but we're often not aware of that choice because of our programming. Like we're not thinking. We're actually truly not thinking. We're just running mental activity. And that's a straight up Bob Proctor quote. And what he defines as mental activity is just running programming. It's like there's no responsibility there. We're just reacting. We're thinking thoughts that we've always thought. We're taking actions we've always taken, and then we're getting the same results or worse. That's just mental activity. But true thinking is taking responsibility, realizing the part that you played in the results that you're having, and then being willing to do the difficult work of, first off, acknowledging your part in it, which is not fun, because usually it sucks to acknowledge.
Over the years, the word responsibility to me has become empowering. And that's how I try to give it to a lot of the patients, the people I'm taking care of, coaching or whatever. And really the idea that once we have taking some level of responsibility, we eliminate the power of the outside force.
Yes.
You with me there?
Oh, yeah.
if I'm blaming the outside world has power over me.
Yep.
My individual, my spouse, my employer, whatever it may be. But the moment I take responsibility for my feelings and my actions, and I have the power back. And that's I love that sense of empowerment. And I love when people finally embrace that. It's simply powerful, which is awesome.
Absolutely.
All right. Crazy, but we're rolling on time here.
Yes.
All right. So I think we could talk for hours.
I think so too.
Yeah. All right. So let me do this. So for our listeners, I know you do some coaching, and I think even for our listeners, you are going to, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're going to set up a one-on-one, a free possibility of touching base with you. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
All right. So how will we go about that? And my girl Whitney will make sure we get this on all our platforms.
Sweet.
Kevin Carton.
Yep.
It's like the milk carton.
Yes, exactly.
So there's kevincarton.com, and we'll put the link that gets you to. So literally will they do an email or will they call?
Oh, it's a video chat just on Zoom, just like we are now.
Oh, wow. That's
yeah.
fun. Yeah. So they can do a one-on-one. You guys get to know each other a little bit and then see where things go from there. So exactly. I'll encourage everyone that's listening, especially if you've never done it, to just be open to the possibility that there's a trajectory for you out there that could get you to where you want to be a heck of a lot faster.
Yes.
Yeah. And maybe a lot clearer as well. Yeah. So it's Carton, kevincarton.com. And you have a podcast.
Yes.
Is that correct? With your brother.
Yep.
I love that. And what's that called?
It's called Science and Spirituality.
Science, Spirituality. All right. So, all right. I have one last question for you. We kind of finish on this. So this is the Health Made Simple show. We're always trying to simplify things, make it easy for people to, become what I like to call the closest to superhuman as possible, which I believe we all are literally superhumans. With that being said, do you have one tip you can leave our listeners tonight? One tip or one suggestion to help them move toward being superhuman?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
I know, big one.
Very, but I have a big answer for that. And I do my best to share it as much as I can, because this for me is the foundation of everything we talked about, is that there is a power in this universe that has created all things. You can call it whatever you want. God is the most common form. There's source, spirit. So many people more in this day and age call it the universe. I think there's a distinction between the universe, but what we see in our materiality and the power that has created it. But there is this power. And in your work, I know you were speaking to this until how you help people heal. A lot of times it's not even so much like what you do, but it's actually invoking that healing power within someone. There is that power. And if I can recommend or just encourage even a little bit, just to ask to build a relationship with that power is within all of us. It's a connection with the intuitive voice, the still small voice, and it's all within. And so as we go within, we're connecting more obviously with ourselves, but there is that power that we can connect with more deeply. And as we just open ourselves to a relationship with that power, again, whatever you want to call it, there's so much energy that could be released and so much power that you can actually work with now to create what you want to create. Because I personally believe like we don't technically manifest. We're the channels through which this power then creates. And we're just the creative people that actually just channel this through. So I know that there's a lot more that we can go into that, but just to speak to that even just briefly, because that has changed my life, building a relationship with that power.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Literally, that's beautiful. Great space to just kind of like platter it up for people and see what they can do with it, because that's the bigness. That's literally the bigness. That's and someone like yourself who are helping people ultimately be open to that and funnel that and use it to your enjoyment, use it to your betterment of life and becoming as close to superhuman as possible. It's awesome.
Yes.
Yeah, well, this was a absolute pleasant surprise. Yeah. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your time. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
I know my listeners are going to love every moment of this. We will send it to every platform we possibly can.
Awesome.
Continue to do what you're doing. I love the journey that you're on. Please keep sharing it. We need more like yourselves. Like
thank you.
Yeah. And so thank you for being here tonight. We appreciate and love you. And maybe our paths will cross again.
I believe so. I hope so. It's awesome being here. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin.